So I'm here with Moses Bernard, Dr. Moses Bernard, who's a very good friend of the Result Cult, Michelle's good friend. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I guess on paper I'm a doctor. I'm a chiropractor, graduated in 2009. Before that my undergrad was exercise phys and biomechanics. After I graduated I realized that what I'd been taught in school wasn't all that interesting to me, so I just kind of kept going a little bit deeper with more and more certifications and courses and pretty much anything there is to learn about movement and exercise, biomechanics, flexibility, mobility, breathing. I've taken it in some way, shape, or form, or I'm trying to take it in some way, shape, or form. So what I've really gathered through looking at all the different pieces from all sorts of different angles is that they're all just trying to get people to move their bodies better. And that's really what I try to do with my practice, is teach people how to move their bodies better. So if there's 168 hours in the week, I care a lot more about what they do in that 167 and a half hours they're not in my office. Yeah. So teaching them to have better habits as opposed to the treatments that I necessarily provide them with.
Yeah. So how do you, I'm curious, as you know, like somebody who's not in your field, I know that people have certain perceptions of, you know, personal training and what they expect going in, or maybe they walk into your practice having some prior experiences. Like, how do you go about, since I know that you're a movement junkie and I kind of understand your philosophy. Both of us come from a functional range conditioning background. He is, I think, a functional range conditioning. You're an FRA.
Yep. And
kin stretch.
Yep.
You have like the trifecta.
And all the FRs too. So they've got a saw manual therapy certification too. So they have a upper body, lower body, and a spine. So I have all those too.
Yeah. So you're like you're Yoda to me. You got all the educational background.
I'm FRC Systems Voltron, basically. All the powers combined.
That's a good way to put it. So when you have somebody coming in to your, I mean, they're walking in looking for a chiropractor. Mm-hmm. How do you go about getting buy-in from that person who maybe expects you just to crack their back?
Well, there's a couple things that I do in my business model that kind of eliminates that type of person. My hours, so I'm not available every single hour of the day like a lot of those practices are. I don't take insurance head up, so people can submit for insurance reimbursement, but we don't do the insurance reimbursement for them. The initial appointment's an hour and a half, no questions asked. So if you've never seen me before, you're spending an hour and a half with me because we're assessing everything. And there's a lot of people who might come in, they'll say, you know what, I just need my back cracked. And the answer is, I don't do that. We don't do that here. If you're in excruciating pain right now and you need some relief, here's a phone number for a clinic that does that. That's not me. So go get some pain relief, get things taken care of. Once you're feeling better, come back and see me so we can fix it so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I think it's really important, especially like I find challenges inside the gym as a personal trainer. You know, like somebody who can easily come in wanting to lose 10, 15 pounds and just want a sweat sesh. I know that buy-in is a big deal, and then also making people very aware of the entire lifestyle factors that go along with it. For us and for me, a big deal is environment. Mm-hmm. For those of you who haven't seen me on Instagram, my house is, I'm building this whole entire house into like a movement sanctuary so that my kids can be in a good environment. I can be in a good environment that's very movement friendly, food friendly. You're not tempted to sit around because it's fun to move and you have a lot of stuff to move around. Like I take a lot of pride in that. So when you are working with somebody, how do you talk to some people outside of the movement aspect and talk to them about, you know, the food factors or environmental factors? Like how do you coach people up on that?
Well, before we started this interview, you had asked me a question about kin stretch, which is we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's a class that I teach out of the space that I practice out of. And in this class, I really try to focus on teaching people how to move better, how they can take ownership of their bodies, how they can screen their own bodies, how they can learn what their bodies are designed to do. And so the environment, I think, is definitely very important. Right now, the space that I'm in there's a yoga studio, and there's also a bunch of treatment rooms. So there's massage therapists, there's physical therapists, there's an acupuncturist on site. So we're already a holistic wellness environment. So the second you step into the building, it's not a medical office. You're not going to see any white coats. You're not going to see phones ringing off the hook and people kind of bitching at insurance companies. Can I say bitching?
Yeah, that's
okay.
perfectly fine.
All right, cool.
No FCC regulation here.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, just the space that they're coming into is already kind of a pro-movement environment. I used to work in more traditional medical offices, and what you'd find is the majority of people were there because they're broken. And there was a very few who were kind of healthy and they wanted to stay healthy. And this is flip-flopped. Most of the people who come through the door are already feeling good and they just want to feel better. It's very rare that there's someone who comes through our doors who is really, really broken and really, really messed up. And so, going back to environment, I will communicate very clearly, I'm not the best guy to get you out of acute pain. You're in a car accident, I'm not the guy to go see. Can I help you? Sure. Am I the best person in the Tampa Bay area to help you with that? I'm not. And I'm totally comfortable communicating that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that, to me, that's most of someone's success has to do with the coaching somebody up on basically being self-sustainable. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. Now, I want to ask you a question that I think I already know the answer to, but I want to let you vent this and get it on tape. Don't round your back during a deadlift.
Okay, so there's... I'm trying to think of how I want to address this. All right, so
and to clarify the question, a deadlift is a move where you pick a bar or a load up off the ground, typically done with a neutral spine. And I know that this guy is a single leg deadlift. What's the word I'm looking for? You're on a quest for a very heavy 400-pound single leg deadlift, and you film all yours and put them on social media. And I know you get a comment all the time about rounding your spine. And you
I'll often post my Jefferson curls too, which is where I usually get the comments from.
Yeah. So I guess give us your notes on the whole don't round your spine during a deadlift.
Well, we can't look at it just as the spine. You have to look at it as every single joint. So every joint has a position where it's able to generate the most force. So if we are trying to generate maximum force, we should put ourselves in a position where the joints are most stable to generate maximal force. So if I'm going to punch someone, my wrist should be kind of fairly neutral. If it's here, I'm not going to be able to generate maximum force. If it's here, I'm not going to be able to. So we want things to be aligned. However, that doesn't mean my wrist should never go into this position and never go into this position. It just means it happens to be strongest in this position. The spine is very similar. So the spine is going to be its strongest and most stable with everything neutral or neutral-ish, okay? It should still be able to bend forwards. It should still be able to bend backwards and sideways and twist and do all these things. And it should be able to do all those things with load. Now, it probably won't be able to handle as much load as it can in a neutral position, but it should still be able to handle load. So if we never train our bodies under load in these varied positions, our body now thinks that position is unsafe. And now that's actually increased our risk of injury. So any injury is going to be the forces that the body was exposed to were higher than the forces that the body was able to handle. And if we never teach our body how to handle forces in certain ranges, the amount that can create stress or create injury ends up being really, really low. So if I never train my back to be in this position, and especially never train it under load, and I happen to be in that position someday, the back's probably not going to like me very much. So it's really about training the different positions. Yes, neutral is stronger, but not necessarily safer.
Yeah, and I think for in my experience, and you can correct me if you want to add something to this, you're more than welcome to. But you find that most people that get injured in positions that they're not conditioned for. It's not because they're not in an optimal position; they're just not flat out familiar with it. And you could take I don't remember where I read this or saw it, but most rotator cuff injuries happen in reaching in the back seat for a baggage or a bag. Not necessarily like throwing a baseball 95 miles an hour, but just simply reaching for a bag that might be 5 to 10 pounds and putting their arm in in an unfamiliar position with a load slightly heavier than their own arm.
Yeah. So with the shoulder, that position is actually called the open packed position. So the deep muscles of the shoulder, they kind of twist as your shoulder kind of wraps in. So when you move your arm this way, you're kind of wrapping things tight. Kind of think of like the old like kind of Chinese finger trap things.
Yeah.
So it's basically tighter when you're this way and kind of looser when you're out this way. So like 99.9% of shoulder dislocations happen in this position. So horizontal abduction with external rotation, which is what this position is called. And if you never train this position, so I reach back to grab something, that's already the most unstable position by definition of the shoulder. And if I now add load, even if it's a low load, that can make me more vulnerable to pop that arm out of the socket.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, not awesome for that person, but that's really good information. So I want to ask you two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And one is, do you have a specific assessment that you like to take people through, or an assessment that you suggest people do at home?
Yes. So the assessment that I do with my patients is two-tiered. One of those tiers involves something called controlled articular rotations. In the FRC world, we just call them CARs.
Yep.
And what that is just taking your joints through their full range of motion. So when we move, we have a tendency to think that there's like a perfect way to move. Okay? Remember MapQuest?
Yeah.
Okay, MapQuest was shit, okay?
Yeah.
You know why MapQuest was shit? Was because it gave you one perfect way to get from point A to point B. It said, if I want to get from here to downtown St. Pete, this is the one way you can take.
Which was rarely right.
Exactly. So whether the road was closed, whether there was a ton of traffic, whether a road didn't exist and it did like 5 years ago, doesn't matter. MapQuest said this is the one perfect way to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of us think human movement works the same way, as if there's one perfect way to squat, or one perfect way to deadlift, or one perfect way to pick up your kids. And it's not like MapQuest, where there's one perfect way. It's more like Google Maps, where there's an infinite number of ways. It says, here's the destination, here's the bajillion different roads to get there, here's the most effective way right now. But if this road's closed, it's going to take a slightly different route. So it's always going to get you to the end destination, it's just going to use different strategies to get there. So with human movement, if I want to throw a ball, my body doesn't say, upload perfect ball throwing program. What it does is it says, okay, what are my options? What can my upper back do rotation wise? What kind of shoulder blade control do I have? What can my glenohumeral joint or my shoulder socket do? What can my elbow do? What can my wrist do? And it comes up with some strategy. And best case scenario, if all those pieces are doing their job, it uses a pretty good strategy. And each time I throw the ball again and again and again, I'm using a slightly different strategy every time, so I'm not actually overusing or overstressing any one joint or any one area. So, the CARs, the controlled articular rotations, is just a way for us to check how well each one of those individual pieces is doing their job. So that's a big part of my assessment, and that's what I'll give my patients to use as kind of a home exercise to teach their body how to move better, to teach their body how to move pieces independently. Furthermore, if there's an area that isn't doing exactly what it's supposed to, I'll go a little bit deeper and figure out the why. So, you don't know how to move your shoulder without your shoulder blade and neck coming along for the ride. Let's look at your shoulder a little bit more specifically. What's going on, internal, external rotation. Basically, we'll look at all the different things that a shoulder can do and all the different planes. Look at the difference between your active range of motion, which is what you can control, and your passive range, which is what you can't control. See if there's any differences between the two. So between the CARs and between the local joint assessments, you get a really, really good picture of everything that the body's doing, every way that they're compensating, what's too weak, what's too tight, what's too loose, and basically they've got kind of the full blueprint of here's every compensation my body has ever made to this day, here's what it's doing and here's what it likes to do, here's how to fix it.
Awesome. Rapid fire question. If you could gift a book to anybody right now, what would it be?
Go Wild by John Rady and Richard Manning. John Rady wrote a book called Spark. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Don't know that one.
Okay, so Spark, do I have like 30 seconds to go on a little tangent here?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to put it on my Amazon list. So
okay, so there was this school district just outside of Chicago, okay, in Naperville, and the phys ed teachers looked at what they were teaching in phys ed, and they realized they were kind of failing their students, because people who stay active in the real world don't stay active through what they're teaching in phys ed. No one stays active throughout their lifetime through ball tag, or like very few people do it through basketball, or most of the things we teach in phys ed. So they stay active with going to the gym, or running, or riding the bike, or yoga, or things like that. And so they decided, how can we teach fitness instead of sports? So they surveyed a bunch of people who have been consistently active for 10 years or more, and they looked at their habits. When did they work out? What kind of things did they do? How did they decide if their workout was effective? So what they ended up doing was, most of the people who were consistent with their workouts, they either did it really early or really late. Okay? For the school year, it worked better to go early. So they created what was called a 0-hour phys ed. So it was before period 1. So it was period 0. Okay? And they gave all these kids heart rate monitors, and they said, run a mile full out. That was day 1 of phys ed. And then they basically got kind of, here's what your max heart rate is. And they said, okay, if you keep this heart rate zone, so if your max is here, if you keep this heart rate zone, if you accumulate X many hours over the course of the year, you get an A in phys ed. I don't care what you do. You can play 3-on-3 basketball with your friends, you can go for a run, you can skip rope in the corner by yourself, you can ride on a bike and read a book. I don't care what you do, just accumulate time in a heart rate zone. Okay? So, at the end of the school year, sure enough, what you'd expect, the kids were leaner than average, body mass indexes were lower, blood pressure was lower, all the traditional health markers got better. But they wanted to see, was anything else affected? So what they ended up doing with these students was they entered them in this international math and science test. So it was the type of test that usually your Asian countries would be kind of first in the world. US would typically be like 16th or 17th, and they just wanted to see, did this group do any different compared to the average American student? Their cohort was first in the world.
Wow.
In math and science performance, with zero change to their math and science curriculum, simply through consistent exercise. So this book, Spark, goes on to explain how and why exercise changes the brain. So if you're a caveman, you go around the corner, you see, oh, saber-toothed tiger over there, you run your ass off, you're going to very closely mirror or kind of match my running effort with, that's where the saber-toothed tigers are. Or if after you hike for 5 miles and you find, oh, there's a good patch of berries here, you're going to remember that's where the berries were. So throughout most of our evolution, activity and memory have been intimately linked. So when we forget that, things kind of get a little messed up. Go Wild goes a step deeper. It doesn't just look at, evolutionarily speaking, what are we supposed to be doing for exercise. It goes into sleep, it goes into play, it goes into meditation, it goes into like social networks, it goes into basically everything. So Go Wild's kind of the sequel to Spark. They're both must-reads, in my opinion, as any movement specialist, trainer, healthcare provider. It's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. I'm definitely putting those on my Amazon list. And that reminds me of, there's a video I shared that's earlier on our feed up there and in our blog. I did a series called Movement Makes You Smarter. Mm-hmm. And I linked a couple studies that you guys can go read. But right along the same lines,
so Spark was basically like the dissertation on all of the studies about how movement makes you smarter.
It might have even been in there. It was a study on London taxi drivers and how they had larger cerebellum sizes than the average person. Cerebellum is a part of the brain linked to long-term memory and spatial navigation. Mm-hmm. They did the same study on London bus drivers who had very predictable routes, and they had normal sized cerebellum, so it was like the random decision making had an effect on there. But then they also had, to couple that was a different study on piano players and how their white matter activity in their brain, which just interconnects all kinds of brain centers, was exceptionally higher and higher skilled piano players, the ones who had to do higher technicality.
Was that Anders Ericsson stuff?
Yeah. It might have been. Okay. It might have been. I'll have to go check. I have some of it up there. I'll send them over. But trade links there. That was pretty good. I'm sure that was in the book there. But You guys need to go see Dr. Moses Bernard online. Follow him online. And how can they reach you?
My website's really easy. It's my name. It is mosesbernard.com. If you screw it up and go drmosesbernard.com, I've got that one too, so it's really, really foolproof.
Yay.
I practice in Kodawari Studios. It's a yoga studio in Tampa on Henderson, just south of Dale Mabry. I teach classes there. I see patients there. I spend way too much time there, but I play there, so everything's good.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, man. I will see you very soon, and thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you got something out of it. You're more than welcome to email us more questions, and if you have one for him, and you forget his email address from 30 seconds ago, or his website, then I'll forward him along. All right? Talk to you soon. Thanks.